be more than human.
Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is J.R. Carroll. I am the author of the More Than Human novels, and today I'm going to give you some recommendations for people who are just getting into fantasy or looking into getting into fantasy. And what are some comparable fantasy titles for different genres that you might already be reading or even watching TV shows and movies? Something, that you can kind of get into and won't be overwhelming. So I'm not going to hit you with super in-depth fantasies, except for maybe one. But before we jump into that, make sure you like, subscribe, hit me down with a comment because our January giveaway is active, and the more you comment, the more you have a chance to win. So make sure you do that, and let's get into it. So the first one, we're gonna get an easy one out of the way. If you've watched my channel for any amount of time, you know what's coming. Detective. If you are into detective novels, detective noir, you know, detective shows.
That's all that was took.
The easiest one is the Dresden Files. Let's be honest here. You have a wizard detective, and especially at the beginning, this is a perfect novel for people who are just dipping their toes into fantasy because it pulls you in slow. Especially if you're into the detective and noir genre, you're going to feel right at home right at the beginning. I mean, he's going to tell you, I'm a wizard, you can find me in the phone book, all that stuff, but it really will ease you through it. And as you go on, it just slowly builds a tree after tree after tree of fantasy until, if you make it to the end, you are surrounded and it has become an epic fantasy. So very easy one to start off with and an easy series to pull you in slowly. Then, now, this is one some people may disagree, but for a
Get 3 coffins ready.
Western fan, I could say The Gunslinger by Stephen King, but once you get past The Gunslinger, it's way too deep for somebody who's not already into fantasy. That is a series that I love, top 5 series. Too deep, too complex for a beginner. So I'm gonna say The Witcher. Especially at the beginning, it's a soft launch. All right, the first 2 books are actually short story collections, so you can read one, stop whenever you want, but it has that feeling of the old school westerns. Geralt out alone. Every once in a while, he has his favorite lady that he sees, and he has that friend. That friend that he gets into trouble, and the old cowboy's got to go and break him out. Or he walks into a town, the town's all messed up, right? And then he's got to set it right. Well, you get that, especially in the first 2 books for The Witcher. And then there is similarities. I don't know if Andrzej Sapkowski was a fan, but there is a similarity between that and like True Grit a little bit. So as the story goes on, so yeah, I mean, another soft launch. There is some high fantasy stuff in there, but I think with the short stories and with Geralt as a character, I think that can pull in some Western people. Then a different type of genre is your tough guy genre, which you used to see in the 70s and you used to see in the 80s.
Go ahead. Make my day.
A lot. They still pop up from time to time, but one that a lot of people know is kind of like a Dirty Harry or and they made a bunch of books on that. But for me, this would be Sandman Slim. He comes in and there's kind of heaven and hell. So there's a lot of that kind of magic, right? Divine magic, which for some reason I feel like a lot of people tend to accept more than just your regular fantasy magic. But that makes it easier to understand, right? You're in the world, there's a heaven, there's a hell, there's a God, there's a devil, the whole bit. But he smokes cigarettes, he drinks too much. He doesn't like to say a lot, but he kicks a lot of ass. I think people who are into that, into that tough guy genre, go in and fix up the place. That's Sandman Slim. I think it's very accessible. It's a urban fantasy, so there's not a lot. The prose aren't gonna bog you down. It's all modern day, and you'll be good to go. Now, if we're talking gangsters,
business is honesty, integrity, hard work, family.
If you like gangster or mob type books and or movies and TV shows and all that good stuff, then you'll love the Greenbone Saga. Just recently finished this. It is set in fiction, like a fictional Japan, and it's not very high fantasy, very low fantasy stuff. Jade gives the people their powers, and only certain people, so it's kind of like a genetic thing. But it's not like they become Superman or anything. They're a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, can do a little bit of like deflection and stuff, but they'll still use guns, knives, and all that good stuff. It's more of like set the beginning feels like it's set right after World War II. No cell phones, some other stuff, but by the end I think like 27 years passes, so you get computers and cell phones at the end of the trilogy. But I think it's very accessible, very easy to understand, not gonna bog you down or overwhelm the new fantasy reader. And then the zombie genre, if you're into zombie stuff, The Rising is amazing. There is some kind of, maybe you might call it like portal fantasy, horror fantasy, but there's a little bit of there's fantasy stuff in this, and it to me is one of the very best zombie stories, zombie media, period. Just love The Rising. And if you're into zombies, I think you will love it. If you're into zombies because you like gore, there is no shortage of gore in The Rising. But it is also an amazing story. Also, you could lump in post-apocalyptic genre in that too. So if you're into the post-apocalyptic, The Rising is great as well. Then we have your cop books or cop genre.
Well, those are my lucky numbers.
And that's, differs from detective, because the detective's more your solo person and he's being a detective. Whereas this is your quintessential cop stuff, and that would be Monster Hunter International. You could lump a little bit of military fantasy into this, but it's more cops. It's more of a cop genre, and it's a fun action shoot 'em up. The group of people like being in the locker room, the cop locker room, and everyone's messing around with each other. Very, very much that. I've only read the first book. The second book I will be reading next month. Super fun book, and I think the series, from what I hear, it just keeps getting better. So here is a complicated one: the history genre. Now, I'm not a specific history, but if you're just into I'll call them fiction, fiction books, but historical kind of fiction, And it doesn't, as long as you don't care what type of history it is. I don't want to lock you in. Like if you're only into Romans, this doesn't work. But if you're just into history in general, the easy answer would be A Song of Ice and Fire. But the answer is going to be Malazan, and this is super heavy. But I feel like somebody who's really into history, like all things history, I think you'll understand it and you'll appreciate it. I appreciate these as much as people may say. I've read the first 3 books twice, and I just couldn't continue. But if you are super into history, it gives you all kinds of crazy stuff. 300,000 years of history, and Erickson does not shy away from dumping that history on you. So if that's your thing, you will love Malazan. And then the last one for this video is the coming of age story.
You guys want to go see a dead body?
And there are so many of them, but as people in the book world know, Stephen King does coming of age probably better than anybody. And a newer book that I think is very easily accessible to a non-fantasy reader is Fairy Tale. Fairy Tale is, got mixed reviews from a lot of booktubers. A lot of people are like, first half of the book, amazing. Second half of the book, meh. The second half of the book is really the fantasy part of the book. So it was weird that in my corner of booktube that was the part that people liked the least. But I think for a non-fantasy reader, that is an excellent starting point. And you may already be into Stephen King. Maybe you like him for his thrillers or his horror, and you're wanting to get into fantasy. That's probably a great place to start. And if you're into coming of age, excellent book. One of my favorite books of the last year. But let me know if you're, if this is something that's interesting you, if you're just dipping your toes into fantasy, or put some other books that you think people who might see this video will like and will actually help them get into the fantasy genre. And more than that, remember, be more than human.